Winter dragged on, the sea freezing in the harbour, great dirty chunks of ice clunking against the thick pilings that held up the quayside. The days grew shorter, the nights longer and darker, and Gunnar sank to his lowest ebb. It was Thorkel that kept him going. Thorkel who sought him out and made him eat and gave him his old sheepskin to wear when the cold bit even more deeply. Gunnar sometimes had the feeling he reminded Thorkel of somebody, and one day, when they were in the crowded hall for supper, he asked who it might be. Rorik was talking to Orm, Gunnar standing behind Thorkel as he ate. "I had a son once," said Thorkel, "a fine boy. It would have been about your age by now, had he lived. But he didn't, and neither did his mother. You've lost someone too, I can tell. Who was it? Mother? Father? Both?" "My father," Gunnar shrugged, unwilling to go into more detail. "Death casts a shadow over all of us," said Thorkel, spooning up broth from a wooden bowl. "There isn't a man or woman in here who hasn't been touched by it, or been its servant. The secret is not to give in to it until you have to." "And when is that?" asked Gunnar. "When you stop breathing, and not before." "What about the Norns? Don't they decide our fate?" "What if they do? You don't know when they're going to cut your thread, so you should just carry on as if it's not going to happen. Otherwise you might just as well not have bothered to have been born in the first place." Rorik came over and sat down beside Thorkel. "A lot of people wish that about you, Thorkel. And why are you talking to the boy about fate and death? I'd rather you didn't make him any more miserable." "You're lucky I like you, Rorik," said Thorkel, shaking his head. "Starkad is right. That tongue of yours is going to get you killed some day." "Well, one thing I'm sure is it won't be Starkad who'll do the killing," said Rorik. "Fetch me some more ale, Gunnar. There's a good lad." Gunnar filled Rorik's goblet with ale from the big barrel in the corner of the hall. Starkad was at another table, watching Rorik, his eyes glittering with hate. Ari was there beside him, as were half a dozen other men, Starkad's band of supporters. Rorik took the goblet from Gunnar and raised it in a mock toast to Starkad, who did the same back. Thorkel tutted, and Rorik turned to him. "You're such an old woman, Thorkel," he said. "What's wrong with a bit of healthy rivalry between men? Or should I say, between a man and a fat boy?" "Let's hope he doesn't get unhealthy then," said Thorkel. "You know as well as I do where this kind of thing ends, Rorik. If I were you, I'd stay away from dark alleys. You might be the better warrior, but hatred leads to cunning." Rorik shrugged, and Gunnar suddenly realised the big man didn't care whether he lived or died. Gunnar understood that feeling now, and he guessed it made a warrior like Rorik a very dangerous man to be around. The days passed slowly. Spring arrived at last with a warm wind from the south, and the iron ruts in Kaupang's alleys soon became the same old stinking mud. The sea ice melted, and the harbour grew busier. Trading ships appeared first, then the longships came, many of them bringing slaves for Orm, and his pens were soon full again. Gunnar was afraid to look in them sometimes, half expecting to see faces he recognised, people from his own steading. Then, one morning, he heard something that made his heart race. Rorik was in a black mood, and Gunnar was hanging round the quayside. He passed a longship where two men were mending sails, talking while they worked with their needles. "I've never seen anything like it," said one of them, a gingery man with a scrappy beard. "Mountains of ice that slide across the land and crush rocks to powder. Rivers of fire that burst out of giant cracks beneath your feet." "Sounds like a hard place to live," said the other, a dark, wiry man with several of his front teeth missing. "What did you say it was called?" "It's got a couple of names," said the first man. "The Land of Ice and Fire, or just Iceland. Not that bad, though. There's good land to farm, too." So, the Land of Ice and Fire did exist. Gunnar asked Thorkel about what he had heard, wishing he had done so before. Soon he knew it took a month by sea to get there, as the old man had said. From then, Gunnar spent every spare moment on the quayside, wondering if he could stow away on a longship. A few days later, Rorik set off to the hall for supper with Gunnar as usual. The setting sun was a red ball, and the night was starting to fill the town with darkness. But the air was still warm, and seagulls swooped and squawked above the roofs. After a while, Rorik and Gunnar came to a crossroads and stopped. 3 men blocked the way ahead, the sun outlining them with a fiery glow. It was Starcad, flanked on one side by Ari and on the other by Hogni, their faces grim. Starcad and Ari were wearing chainmail and helmets. They carried shields and had drawn their swords. Hogni was also wearing chainmail, a rusty old byrnie with big ragged holes in it that was far too short for him. He carried an old short-handled battle-axe, its blade a thick slab of black iron. "So, the moment has come," Rorik said, hand on his sword hilt. "Is it to be just you and me, Starcad, or do I have to kill your 2 puppies as well?" "You'll have to kill the whole pack, Rorik," said Starcad, a smile on his lips. "You don't seem to have many friends among the men of Orm's Hall." Gunnar looked round and drew in his breath. Starcad's supporters blocked each alley, 6 of Orm's hounds armed and ready for battle. But Rorik just laughed. "You call that lot men?" he snorted. "And where'd you get that byrnie, Hogni? You should have stolen one that was a better fit." "You think you're so funny, Rorik, don't you?" said Hogni, his face dark with anger. "Well, you won't be laughing much after I finish with you. And I'm going to kill that slave boy of yours as slowly as I can." "You won't be killing anyone today," Rorik said quietly, slowly drawing his sword from the scabbard. "Give me some room, Gunnar." Suddenly, Ari rushed forward with a yell, wildly swinging his sword. Rorik simply stepped to one side and Ari stumbled past, flailing. 2 more men moved forward, and their swords raised, and Rorik parried huge blows from both, blade ringing on blade. Rorik soon killed one man, almost hacking his neck through, and wounded the other in the shoulder, forcing him to back off. "Come on then, Hogni," said Rorik, laughing. "What are you waiting for?" Hogni roared and came at him, his axe held high. Rorik's sword flashed, and Gunnar glimpsed a look of terror on the smith's face. Then Hogni was dead too. His body sprawled at Rorik's feet, his head split wide open. "What about you, Starcad?" said Rorik. "You haven't struck a blow yet. But then, maybe you're a coward who watches others do the fighting." Now Starcad stepped forward and rained blows on Rorik, who parried every strike. Starcad was soon gasping for breath, his face red with effort. "You'll have to do better than that," said Rorik, enjoying himself. Gunnar realised Ari was sneaking up beside Rorik. "Watch out, Rorik!" he yelled, and Rorik looked round. Starcad saw that Rorik was distracted and came in for the kill, but Rorik quickly turned back to deal with him, ramming his sword deep into his chest. Rorik pulled his blade free, and Starcad sank to his knees, looking surprised, and then fell, face down in the mud. Ari roared at the others and they charged, shields overlapping, a wooden wave that crashed into Rorik and knocked him down. They held him on the ground as Ari stood over him, his sword point at Rorik's throat. "I could kill you here," Ari hissed, "but I think that pleasure should belong to someone else. Take him to Orm and bring the boy."